All right, let's dive into something super relevant today. Um, Data privacy and data protection. We hear these terms everywhere.
Yeah.
And we got some fascinating sources to unpack this time. A report from the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace about sovereign wealth funds,
Okay.
and then sections of the Digital Personal Data Protection Act of 2023 from the Indian government.
Interesting combination.
Yeah, it is. But we'll see how they all tie in together. So, right off the bat, I know I've used these terms interchangeably.
Right.
Data privacy and
Yep.
data protection. But what is the actual difference?
Yeah, it's a very common mix-up, but it's really important to understand the distinction. So the easiest way to think about it is data protection is the what, and data privacy is the why. Data protection is all about the mechanisms and processes
Okay.
that are used to keep data safe, things
Hmm.
like strong passwords, encryption, firewalls, things like that. It's about preventing unauthorized access, use, disclosure of information.
Okay, so data protection is the shields and the moats. It's all the technical stuff.
Exactly. Exactly. Now, data privacy is more about the individual rights
Okay.
and freedoms. It's centered on giving people control
Well-
over their personal information, how it's collected, used, shared, stored, even deleted. So data privacy is the why. Why should you have control over your data? And that's a really important question in today's world, where data is power.
So data protection is the fortress, and data privacy is the laws of the land inside that fortress.
Yeah, that's a really great way to put it. Yeah.
Okay.
So, I mean, you could have, just to give you a concrete example, you could have a website with top-notch data protection measures in place.
Right.
But if they're selling your personal information to third parties without your knowledge or consent, that's a data privacy violation.
Oh, wow. Okay, so it's not just about keeping data secure. It's also about respecting individual rights.
Exactly. And I think both the sources that we're looking at today really highlight that.
Yep.
The Carnegie Endowment report talks about how sovereign wealth funds need to be so careful about data protection because they're dealing with very sensitive information, often tied to national security.
Right.
And then the Indian Digital Personal Data Protection Act, it lays out very specific principles for how organizations should collect, use, store personal data in a way that respects individual privacy.
So it's interesting how these two very different sources, one looking at these massive global funds, the other focusing on individual rights in India,
Yeah.
both emphasize this need for balance between protecting the data, but also respecting individual control.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to how universal this issue is. Data privacy is not just a theoretical concern anymore. It really affects every single one of us in the digital age. And unfortunately, there are a lot of misconceptions out there.
Oh, tell me about it. I used to think, I have nothing to hide, so data privacy doesn't matter to me.
Right.
But I've realized that that is such a dangerous oversimplification.
Yeah, that's a classic myth, right? It's not about hiding something. It's about control and agency. Everyone has the right to decide how their information is used,
Right.
even if it's not quote-unquote top secret stuff. I mean, think about it. You wouldn't walk around with a billboard broadcasting your browsing history.
Definitely not. Never thought of it that way.
Right. It's about setting boundaries. Just like you have a right to privacy in your physical life, you have the same right to privacy in your digital life.
Makes sense. Another myth I think I've fallen for, and maybe some of our listeners have, is that once you delete something online, it's gone forever.
Oh, yeah.
Poof,
You're-
vanished. But the truth is way more complicated than that, right?
It is. Deleting data is kind of like trying to erase something written in ink. You might get rid of the original, but copies could still exist. Data can persist in backups and archives even after you hit that delete button. And this is precisely why understanding your data privacy rights are important. For example, the right to be forgotten, as enshrined in regulations like GDPR and the Indian Act that we're talking about, it gives individuals more control over their digital footprint.
So it's not a perfect system, but these rights, at least, give us some power to reclaim our data.
Exactly. And it puts pressure on organizations to handle our data responsibly.
Speaking of organizations, I mean, they hold so much of our data, everything from our bank details to our online shopping habits. What's their responsibility in all of this?
Well, organizations have a massive responsibility to safeguard consumer data. Think of them like the knights guarding a castle.
Okay.
Consumer data is the treasure that they need to protect. And just like a knight needs multiple layers of defense, armor, a shield, a watchful eye,
Right.
organizations need a multifaceted approach to data protection.
So it's not just about having a strong password policy. It's about creating a whole culture of security.
Exactly. And the Carnegie Endowment report gives some really interesting examples of how sovereign wealth funds are approaching data protection.
Hmm.
They're dealing with huge sums of money,
Right.
sensitive geopolitical information, so they have to be incredibly careful. But the principles are the same for any organization: robust security measures, transparency about data practices, and clear accountability.
So it sounds like transparency is a big theme here. No more hiding behind the jargon-filled privacy policies.
Exactly. And the Indian Act places a strong emphasis on consent and purpose limitations. So, organizations need to be upfront about why they're collecting data, how they'll use it, how long they'll keep it, and they need to get explicit consent from individuals before collecting or processing any of their data.
So it's about having a clear conversation, not just burying the details in the fine print.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And when organizations don't follow those rules, the consequences can be pretty severe.
That's what I kind of want to unpack next. What happens if organizations just don't follow the rules? Is it just a slap on the wrist, or is it something more?
No, it's definitely not a slap on the wrist.
Okay.
Failing to comply with data privacy laws can have serious repercussions. We're talking financial penalties,
Right.
reputational damage, legal action, and just a loss of customer trust. And the Indian Digital Personal Data Protection Act actually lays out a very clear penalty structure for noncompliance,
Hmm.
with fines that reach into the millions of dollars. And we've seen real-world examples of this with data breaches and privacy scandals
Yeah.
causing significant damage to companies' reputations and bottom lines.
So the stakes are pretty high
Yeah.
for everyone involved.
Absolutely. And that's why fostering a culture of data privacy awareness is so important. We need to move beyond just checking compliance boxes
Mhm.
and create a society where data privacy is just ingrained in everything we do online.
Yeah. It sounds like we need a complete cultural shift. And I guess that starts with education.
Absolutely. We need to educate people from a young age about data privacy risks,
Yeah.
best practices, and we need to have open and honest conversations about data privacy concerns. Challenge organizations to do better and hold them accountable when they fall short.
Which is a perfect segue to what we're going to be looking at in part 2 of this deep dive, where we're going to get into some real-world examples of how data privacy, or the lack thereof, is playing out on the global stage. Get ready for some eye-opening revelations.
Yeah, we're going to uncover the hidden connections between these seemingly unrelated topics and see just how far-reaching the impact of data privacy really is.
So stay tuned for part 2.
Welcome back to our deep dive. So we've kind of laid the groundwork. We understand the difference between data protection and data privacy, and now it's time to see how these concepts actually play out in the real world, especially when we're talking about issues with, huge international implications.
Okay, so let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture.
Exactly.
So sovereign wealth funds, the Carnegie Endowment report, really dug into these. And I have to say, some of the findings were a little concerning.
Yeah, these funds are massive. We're talking trillions of dollars in assets, and they're often kind of shrouded in secrecy,
Right.
which makes it a breeding ground for potential data privacy issues.
One example that really stuck out to me was the case of the Russian Direct Investment Fund, RDIF,
Right.
and their involvement with the Sputnik V COVID-19 vaccine.
Yeah, that was a complex situation. The RDIF played a big role in developing and distributing that vaccine. But there were some real red flags about potential data privacy violations throughout the process.
Yeah, the report talks about how the RDIF used this network of intermediaries
Right.
to market and sell the vaccine. And some of these intermediaries had questionable backgrounds and zero experience in pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, you have a government fund using essentially middlemen with no expertise to handle something as critical as a vaccine rollout during a global pandemic. That's a major red flag because it raises a lot of questions
Right.
about transparency, accountability, what data was being collected, how was it being used, who had access to it,
Right.
and those questions just weren't adequately addressed.
I feel like the urgency of the pandemic might have overshadowed some of the data privacy considerations.
Yeah, that's a real concern. When you have a global health crisis like that, there's so much pressure to find solutions quickly that sometimes it leads to cutting corners.
Right.
And unfortunately, data privacy can be one of those casualties.
Which makes you wonder how often this happens in other high-stakes situations.
That's a good question. And it leads us to another really interesting example that the report highlights: the 1MDB scandal in Malaysia.
Okay, I've heard of that, but refresh my memory.
Well,
What was the 1MDB scandal, and what does it have to do with data privacy?
Okay, so the 1MDB scandal involved a state-owned investment fund in Malaysia that was supposed to, like, drive economic development. But instead, billions of dollars were just siphoned off through this incredibly complex web of shell companies' shady deals.
Okay.
Investigations revealed a shocking level of corruption, with money just flowing into personal accounts, even funded, like, lavish lifestyles.
So corruption on a massive scale.
Yes.
But where does data privacy fit into all of this?
Well, think about the sheer volume of financial data involved in a fund like this.
Right.
Transaction records, investment details, personal information of investors and beneficiaries. And if the people managing that fund are corrupt, they're likely to misuse that data to cover their tracks.
Right.
Hide their illegal activities, even silence potential whistleblowers.
So they're essentially weaponizing data to facilitate this web of corruption.
Yeah. And that's precisely what makes data privacy so critical. It's not just about protecting our information from hackers or identity thieves. It's also about safeguarding against these powerful entities that might use our data for their own gain, whether it's financial, political, or otherwise.
Okay, so it's about protecting ourselves from, like, institutional abuse as well.
Exactly.
Okay. So we've seen how data privacy plays out in the world of high finance. But let's shift gears a little bit and talk about something else.
Okay.
The arms trade.
Sure.
This is another area where data privacy can have some pretty serious implications. And the Carnegie Endowment Report touches on this as well, focusing on the United Arab Emirates and how they use something called defense offset agreements as part of these arms deals.
Right.
I have to admit, I'm not that familiar with defense offset agreements. What are they?
Okay, so imagine a country is buying weapons from another country. A defense offset agreement is like a side deal that often comes with that main arms contract. It's supposed to provide some kind of economic benefit to the purchasing country, but it can also create these opportunities for corruption and data misuse.
How so?
Well, these agreements can involve all sorts of activities. Investments in local industries, technology transfers, joint ventures, things like that. And they often involve the exchange of a lot of sensitive data. Military secrets, technological blueprints, personal information of the individuals that are involved in the deal.
Yeah, I can see how things could get a little murky there,
Yeah.
especially in a region where transparency isn't always, like, a top priority.
Exactly. And the report raises some serious concerns about how these offset agreements, which often involve UAE sovereign wealth funds like Mubadala, Tawazun, could be used to obscure the flow of data and money, potentially compromising national security and individual privacy.
It's a reminder that data privacy isn't just about protecting, like, our personal information,
Right.
but it also has these huge implications for national security, international relations, even global stability.
Absolutely. And it highlights the need for international cooperation and standardized regulations to ensure that data privacy is protected, regardless of where that data originates or travels.
So we've explored some pretty complex and concerning scenarios, but it's not all doom and gloom, right? I mean, there are steps being taken to address these issues and strengthen data privacy protections.
Yeah, absolutely. The growing awareness of data privacy rights and the increasing number of legal frameworks that are being implemented globally are really positive signs. I mean, the Indian Digital Personal Data Protection Act is a significant step forward.
It's a reminder that we're not powerless in this digital age. We have rights and we can exercise them.
Exactly. But it takes vigilance, education, and a willingness to hold organizations accountable. We need to be informed consumers and active citizens demanding transparency and ethical data practices from the companies and institutions that we interact with.
So it sounds like we all have a part to play in shaping a future where data privacy is respected and upheld.
Absolutely. Data privacy isn't just a technical issue, it's a societal one. And by working together, we can create a digital world that is both secure and empowering.
Well said. Now let's take a short break. And when we come back, we'll explore some practical steps that we can all take to protect our data online. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been talking about data privacy on this huge global scale, but now let's bring it home. What can we as individuals do to actually protect our data online?
It's really empowering to know that we're not just passive bystanders, in this digital age. There are practical steps we can take to safeguard our information
Okay.
and, navigate the online world with more confidence.
I am ready to level up my digital defenses.
Yeah.
So what are some essential tips we should all know?
Well, let's start with the basics. Passwords, you know they're the first line of defense against unauthorized access, and they're often the weakest link. So using strong, unique passwords for each of your online accounts is absolutely crucial.
Password 123 isn't going to cut it.
Yeah.
But creating and remembering all those complex passwords can be so overwhelming.
I hear you. And that's where a password manager can really come in handy.
Okay.
It's a secure tool that can generate and store all your passwords. So you only need to remember one master password. Think of it like a digital vault for all your login credentials.
Okay. Password manager, check. What's next on our digital hygiene checklist?
Let's talk about app permissions.
Okay.
You know, those pop-ups that ask for access to your camera, your microphone, your contacts, location.
Right.
Don't just blindly hit allow.
I have definitely been guilty of that.
Right, right. I mean, it's so tempting to just click through and get to using the app.
Yes.
But it's worth taking a moment to pause and consider what you're actually giving access to. Do you really want that game to have access to your microphone?
Right.
Does that shopping app need to know your exact location? Being selective about app permissions is a key part of protecting your privacy.
So it's about being more mindful of our digital footprint. Like, what information are we sharing? And who are we sharing it with?
Exactly. And, you know, think about your social media presence, too. What information are you actually comfortable sharing publicly?
Yeah.
Are you maybe oversharing personal details that could put your privacy at risk?
You're right. It's about finding that balance between connecting with others, but also protecting our privacy. Are there any other tools or services out there that can help us enhance our online privacy?
Yeah, absolutely. Consider using a VPN,
Okay.
a virtual private network. It encrypts your internet traffic, making it much harder for others to track your online activity. Think of it like putting all your data in a secure tunnel as it travels across the internet.
Oh, I like that. A digital bodyguard.
Exactly. And you can also explore privacy-focused browsers and search engines.
Okay.
They prioritize user privacy and minimize data collection, so you have more control over your online experience.
So many options.
Yeah.
What would you say is the key takeaway for listeners who want to just improve their digital privacy?
You know, I think the most important thing is awareness. Take the time to understand the risks,
Right.
explore the tools that are available, and just make informed choices about how you manage your data online.
It's about being proactive, not just reacting after something bad has happened.
Exactly, exactly. Data privacy is an ongoing journey, not a destination. You know, the digital landscape is constantly evolving, and we need to evolve with it, staying informed and adapting our strategies as needed.
It's not about being perfect. It's about being aware and making those conscious choices.
Well said. And remember, this is a collective effort. By sharing knowledge, raising awareness, demanding better from the organization that we interact with, we can create a more responsible and empowering digital future for everyone.
It's about taking control of our digital lives.
Yeah,
And shaping the online world that we want to see.
exactly.
So, dear listeners, as we wrap up this deep dive, remember to stay curious, stay informed, and stay empowered. Until next time.